Hi, this is Dr. Patrick Cohn with another episode of the Tennis Psychology Podcast. I'm joined with Jaclyn Ellis, one of our mental performance coaches at Peak Performance Sports. Today we're going to start a new series about the mindset of competitive tennis players. And we're going to start right off with how to stay confident and in control when you're losing. This is the Tennis Psychology Podcast. So, Jaclyn, thanks for joining me today on the podcast and the show. We're going to talk about some unique challenges for competitive tennis players, but we're also going to talk about very specific issues in this podcast. We want to start by talking a little bit about how to stay confident and in control when you're losing. Because I've seen some major tanks out there in the junior tennis world when my daughter was competing, where girls would lose a tight first set, maybe go to a tiebreaker in the first set, and then just give up, because they're so frustrated and they're so upset. Let's talk a little bit about what the challenges you see around composure and staying confident when down in the match.
Yes, I've seen that quite a bit where tennis players may gain a lead and then they do start to tank. So what I'm seeing is a lot of times there is an expectation going on where maybe they say, okay, I should be beating this opponent, but my opponent has their A game, they're playing really well, I'm not playing well, and they gain some momentum, and now I lose my game, and I start to tank a little bit. So that is a huge challenge within junior tennis players.
When we talk about tanking, I look at it as the athlete is just so frustrated, and they feel so helpless with their game that they cannot turn the match around. Would you look at it differently, or would you add to that?
Yes, they are so frustrated and they've lost composure. They feel that, I've heard this quite often, they've hit a brick wall. Okay, so I usually ask them, well, what does that mean when you hit the brick wall? I've run out of ideas in how to attack the opponent's weaknesses. I don't know what to do. I feel helpless, they tell me.
Yeah, it sounds like hitting a wall. Sounds like they're helpless at that point. So can we say this is more about losing confidence in that moment with your game, or it's more about just a higher level of frustration and helplessness?
I would say a lot of it is about losing confidence in their game because they've been trying different actions or different game plans and they're not working. Maybe they normally do work, so they lose confidence in their ability to execute in that match against that opponent.
Well, and I would say that they lose their ability to come up with a strategy. They lose the confidence in their strategy and their tactics.
Right.
Because as you and I talk about, confidence in your skills shouldn't go away, right? Confidence is very stable, and just because, you started a match and it was going well, and then all of a sudden things aren't going well for you, you start to lose the first set, that doesn't mean you should have less confidence in your strokes and your skills, right?
Right. Confidence is stable. Yes.
Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about the challenges, right? We know what happens when some athletes or some tennis players get down in the match. They mentally get down, right? In more ways than one. So what can we do to help? Let's start with the composure part and how we can help tennis players really grind it out and not tank.
Yes. Okay. So I would encourage the athlete to come up with some sort of a reset between points. That way they can feel more in control during the match. Even if the game plan may not be working, at least they can take control of their mindset and reset between the points. I call that my reset button, if you will.
Hit the reset button. All right. What about some pre-match mental prep? I'm thinking about maybe that you have the tennis players think about how am I going to respond? If I'm winning, then all of a sudden I'm losing, I'm down in the match, or I'm down a set and a break in the second. Maybe have them think through what's the best way to react, which we call a coping response. What would that look like?
Yeah, so a good way to go about that would be to visualize. Perhaps if you already know the opponent, you can visualize that situation, what's going on with this opponent, or how would I cope if I am down in the set or I've lost a few points in a row. So they can do some visualization there, or maybe they can visualize themselves using some positive self-talk to, again, regain some control or boost that confidence in the moment if they need to.
Basic idea is have a prepared coping response for really anything that might happen out there. Maybe you're leading big on the opponent and you didn't expect it. Maybe you're behind on an opponent you're expected to beat. So having that coping response and how you're going to respond, certainly. Let's talk about from the confidence standpoint. One of the things that I tell my tennis players, Jaclyn, is look, you don't learn anything in the match if you're just going to lay down. You're going to give up. You're going to feel helpless. You never learn to battle back. So you have to find a way to grind it out and battle back with your B game or with your A game if your A game's not beating your opponent, right? So that's an important part, I think, is young tennis juniors need to come to grips with that idea that if I'm going to get better, then I got to keep my head in the game and I got to grind this out to the end. I got to make it difficult for my opponent at least.
I absolutely agree with that. And I tell my tennis players the same exact thing. Your objective may change in the match. Your objective may not necessarily be to win, but how can I make it difficult for my opponent? If they are coming at me, attacking, my ground strokes, what can I do to make it difficult for them? Yes.
Yeah, or maybe I only won 2 games in the first set. Maybe the objective is to win as many games as I can in the second set, or as many points as I can per game without getting outcome focused as well. But from the confidence standpoint, we kind of addressed this earlier because we said that confidence is a long-term project, that just because you're losing doesn't mean that you lose all confidence in your skills. So what's the idea that's going to help tennis players maintain that confidence regardless of the score of the match?
Well, a big idea here is to, number one, take it 1 point at a time. A lot of tennis players will combine several points that they have lost, and that tends to hurt confidence. So if they can really narrow it down and focus on 1 point at a time, I'm going to try to implement my game plan in this 1 point. Once that point is done, it's done. Let's move on to the game plan for the next point. So I think a lot of times they're adding up the points, and that can get confusing and definitely hurt confidence. So that's one idea.
Yeah. And I would also go back to the idea that your skills haven't changed. Your tactics may be changing, but your strokes haven't changed throughout the match. It's not like you lost your strokes in any way. You will lose your strokes, though, if you're frustrated, upset, and you feel helpless, then your strokes aren't going to be the same as when you started the match.
Right.
Yes.
If you can maintain composure, that will at least give yourself an opportunity for success. If you're not composed, all of that goes out the window.
Thanks for joining us on the Tennis Psychology Podcast. We'll see you on the next episode. Hey, if you want more articles and videos and podcasts, jump over to our tennis website at sportspsychologytennis.com. And if you're interested in mental coaching with any of our mental coaches, visit peaksports.com.